Hey guys. Hey guys. Darag here. A couple of minutes to go and we'll get started. So, not sure if anyone's listening in yet, but this is the second Facebook Live and no point looking at the thermometer for the time. Finland, we've had 6 sunny days in a row. That's after like 5 weeks of 1 or 2 days a week of some smidgen of sun. And here's the temperature gauge. This morning was like minus 20 outside, 14, 15 inside. So, glorious spot. Alright, so what's the time? Let me just double check. That's all good. So, this time, last time, let's recur. And thanks for coming on. And I look forward to sharing this with you. The idea behind this little series of videos is to update you on my encapsulation of current thoughts around health and particularly around diet. And hang on a minute. See who's watching. I'm still learning to drive this thing. Welcome, Sarah. If anyone has questions, I think you can. There's a place to add them, and I'll look at the questions at the end rather than halfway through. So today I'll go through the key parts of the notes I want to cover, and then we'll go on from there to Q&A. Now, last week we covered carbohydrates, and it could be called the biggest challenge about low carb, high fat, ketogenic eating, or it could be the main thing to focus on. So either one of those statements is true about these elements. First element I talked about was carbohydrate, and it can be a real shock to think about getting your carbohydrates down below 20 grams a day, particularly once you realize what 20 grams a day is like. And to give you an idea, I reposted or made a comment about how do you figure out net and total, and I used an apple as an example. And an apple, a medium-sized apple, is 25 grams of total grams of carbohydrate. And if you take off the fiber, which is, I think, 4.4 from memory, so you get 20.6 grams of carbohydrate net. So whether it's total or net, one apple is still more than your whole daily intake of carbohydrates that you want to be looking at if you're going for that under 20 grams. And so I joke about that we hear that an apple a day was supposed to keep the doctor away, but maybe not. Maybe that's old technology. So one thing I did want to mention is, just to follow up on that, is that it's our personal emotional attachment to food, because there are no essential carbohydrates. It's not like proteins that we're going to talk about today, or fats, where there are essential pieces of those essential fatty acids, essential amino acids, that are actually we can't do without, whereas there's nothing like that with carbohydrates. So you really can go to zero carbs, and what really limits our ability to do that is our complete attachment to them. And I say that people I talked last week about having to stop being a baby, about knowing what to reduce and actually doing those steps to reduce your carbs. And when I think about that, I've often put this little triangle up with, on one corner at the bottom, you've got helplessness. And that's what babies feel. Babies are generally helpless. They can't make choices for themselves. So that's what we often feel around our willingness and ability to cut down carbohydrates, is helplessness. And the other side of that triangle is rebellion. It's like, who are you to tell me that I have to take all those carbohydrates out? Or I know it's good for me, but I'm just not going to do it, because those things are my favorite foods. And so when you've got helplessness on one side and rebellion on the other, like you've got babyhood and teenager all wrapped up in one, and if you find a common link to that, like if you had a triangle with helplessness on one corner, rebellion on the other, and the top point would be what I would call addiction. Now, isn't that an interesting idea, that addiction is actually helplessness and rebellion all wrapped up in one? And so it's also a salient point, because it can be a really tough choice. It does require a lot of discipline, but once you've experience the benefits of applying that discipline, then the discipline becomes more of devotion. It becomes an easy thing to do. And that's been my experience over the last several years of going low carb. Now, what else did I want to say? But I've actually made a little list of notes, so I won't get lost this time so much. So if once you handle those thoughts about reducing, all of your emotional attachments to food and owning up to what you need to do, then the best step, just to recap last episode, is to look at going under 20 grams of carbohydrate, net grams. So that means you can take the fiber off. And if that doesn't lead to weight loss and fat loss you figure out because your clothes get looser. If that doesn't do that, then the next step is to try 20 grams of total grams of carbohydrates. So you keep the fiber in when you're adding up your totals. And then if that doesn't work, then you go to minus 10 grams not minus 10, but you go to 10 grams of total carbohydrates or less. And that's where some people go to 0. So that's the strategy behind the low carbohydrate piece. Start in those places. And why I started under 20 grams of net carbs at the beginning is because 90% of people will get a result at that level. 95% probably under 20 grams total, and nearly 100% under when they go below 10. So that gives you a bit of a strategy to how to work with that. And as I said, there's a sheet I've put out that has what you can eat on that kind of diet, and that's all laid out there, so it's easy for you to access. Now the next step after that, after you've done that, the next step is to really look at protein. And why would I put protein as number 2? Because I call it an LCHF, or low carb, high fat, or otherwise known as low carb, healthy fat diet. That is, sorry, I've just been seeing people come in. Hi Ian, hi Mandy, nice to see you on the call. Thanks for coming on. And so, yeah, why protein is that protein rather than fat is that protein actually stimulates insulin more than fat, less than carbohydrates. So carbohydrates stimulate a lot of insulin, protein stimulates medium amounts of insulin, fat stimulates low amount of insulin. Fiber actually stimulates insulin as well, so anything we eat can stimulate insulin. But we're trying to attack the big things that stimulate insulin first. So the carbohydrates were the first, and then the second one is the protein. So one of the things about protein is that protein can't be stored. Fat can be stored, carbohydrate can be stored either as glycogen, or we can only limit so much glycogen in our body, only store so much. And then the other thing we can do with carbohydrates, convert it to fat, and then obviously store that. And that's insulin's job. As I call insulin, is Mr. Scrooge, and it takes all that extra energy and funnels it into the fat stores, into the gold vaults kind of thing, and won't let it out until you get the insulin down. So you have to get Mr. Scrooge out of the way, get the insulin down to get the carbohydrates, get that energy out if you need it. And but protein doesn't do that. It can't actually be stored as protein. So you can't save it for a rainy day. You need a certain amount of amino acids that all gets funneled through and used or thrown out, or converted to glucose. Some of it gets converted to glucose, gets converted to fat. So that's something I want to talk about is evening out your protein intake during the day. And the other thing about protein is people have often heard is that the skin is the biggest organ. Well, if you think about muscle as an organ, muscle is actually the biggest organ. And some people call it the muscle is actually the organ of longevity. If you can maintain your muscle mass, you don't have to be a bodybuilder type, but maintain solid muscle mass over your lifetime, there's a lot bigger chance of greater longevity with that. And the trend over the past 30, 40 years has really been to reduce the amount of protein we're eating. And we've particularly seen that in things like breakfast, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that's really funny, given that if you look at, the Rolling Stones song, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. And if you have to wonder, I bring that song up because protein is an essential part to experiencing satisfaction in your body. It's it'll satisfy you, mind, body, and soul more than carbohydrate and more than fat. So it's an amazing thing that we actually hunger for. And, in terms of our needs for protein, it changes with our sex, whether we're male or female. Males generally need more protein than females do. It changes with our body weight, not necessarily our body fat, but our lean body mass, how much of our body is actually muscle. And it changes with our exercise level, obviously. But it also changes with age. A lot of people think that your needs for protein come down with age because you're not working out as much, or you're just not as active, or whatever. Where actually your protein requirements go up because you just don't absorb it as well. And so one mistake I see in old folks' homes is they take protein out. If you look at, I had a father-in-law go through an old age home just recently, and they really up the carbs and reduce the protein, and it's just not good for them at all. So those things taking into account those things, is there a general amount we generally can think we should be eating? And the truth is, there's a lot of confusion about what a healthy protein intake is. They say the minimum for RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. And I'm from New Zealand, so I work in grams and kilograms. So I'll try and put some ounces and pounds in there to make some sense. But you can just use a calculator, an online calculator, to figure that out. But generally, because unless you've got kidney disease, a lot of people get confused thinking that protein damages kidneys. In a healthy person, that's absolutely incorrect. The idea of a low protein diet for a person with kidney disease is different to eating a low protein diet to not cause kidney disease. So you're only really having a low protein diet if you have kidney disease. Otherwise, if you are normally healthy, there's no issue with however amount you want to go with protein. And so because there are no negatives really and a lot of positives associated with having more protein, it's better to err on the positive side, like having too much protein rather than too little. So if your goal is actually fat loss or weight loss, then the biggest thing is to handle carbohydrates at the beginning and go back to my first Facebook Live last week for that, and then this one's about protein. Well, so now we're down to how much protein and when in the day to have that. Now, there's a lot of good research coming out now that says that you need at least 30 grams of protein. This for an average person. If you're a little smaller, like me, you might need a little less. If you're a little bigger, you exercise more, that male-woman thing. Aging again, you might want to top it up again. God, I hate to say it, but I'm 63 next week, so I could be in the old age bracket soon, but it's hard to even think of myself like that. But I know one thing for me is it's been really a personal challenge to increase my protein intake. And one of the simplest ways to get around that for me is to actually have a protein-based breakfast. And I'll talk another time about when to have breakfast, but the whole key is that protein doesn't, like I said, it doesn't get stored, so that your body can't pick and choose. So you've got to have certain amounts of those essential amino acids running in your body all the time. So there's a lot of recommendations now coming up to have equal amounts of protein throughout the day. And if you look at a standard Western diet, we tend to eat like a high-grain breakfast, say a sandwich for lunch, which is again predominantly grain with a tiny sliver of meat in it. And then we load up on protein and grains and everything else for dinner. And so you really don't give your body the protein it needs when it needs it. And so you're often, you'll be picking during the day because you're not satisfied, and then you get to the end of the day and you just really fill up. So that whole idea is to start to have a protein breakfast. Whenever you decide to have breakfast, have at least 30 grams of protein. Now, what does 30 grams of protein look like? Because you don't eat protein unless you're eating a whey supplement or something like that. You eat food. And the best foods for us are meat, chicken, fish, eggs. I was a vegetarian for 35 years, and I can appreciate some people who still want to maintain that. It can have an emotional challenge making those changes, and I do highly recommend making those changes. But if you're still committed to that lifestyle, then you just have to realize that if you're a vegetarian, it's harder to get your carbohydrates right down. because if you're eating a mixture of lentils and rice to get the balance of amino acids, then lentils are 60% carbohydrate, and rice is like 95% carbohydrate. So there's a lot of carbohydrates there. If you can eat eggs, that's great. Vegans have a harder time, but you can do it if you limit things to things like tofu, seitan, some edamame beans. I think have really. So you can do stuff like that to increase your protein. But the easiest way to do it is to look at grams of meat, and that's I'll talk about that because it's just easy and simple. And if you're vegetarian, you just need to do a little more digging around that. But if you're good with eating meat, chicken, and fish, then you're generally looking at about a quarter of that amount of meat. So say if you're looking at getting 30 grams of protein in a meal, you're looking at getting 4 times that, 120 grams of meat, chicken, or fish. And so then that's what you have for breakfast. And one egg has generally 6 to, like a medium to big sized egg is like 6 to 8 grams of carbohydrate. So I'll have 4 eggs for breakfast and a little bit of nitrate-free bacon or just the eggs. And sometimes I'll mix it up with some smoked salmon, or you can mix it up with anything. So you can add, Sally has like 3 eggs and some salmon or bacon. She mainly likes the salmon. You can vary it, but it gives you an idea. And one thing that's important to realize, my daughter reminded me of this the other day because she's starting to look at this. She Googled, and I always recommend you Google the word you're looking for. Like say she Googled eggs and then the word nutrition afterwards. So she get eggs and nutrition into the Google search bar. And she comes up with a big egg has like 0.6 grams of, she was looking at 100 grams of egg, and it had 1.1 gram of carbohydrates, which freaked her out a little bit. And just, because I thought I was allowed to have eggs as much as I wanted. But a big egg has about like a half a gram of carbohydrates. So four eggs actually has 2 grams of carbohydrates. So you have to actually count that as part of your carbohydrate content for the day if you're going under 20. And the issue with chicken, fish, and meat is it's clean. There's no, in the sense of carbohydrates, there are no carbohydrates in those things. So it's easier to, if you go for the 30 grams, 120 grams, and just have that whenever you have breakfast. And I'll talk about that next week. But make it a protein breakfast and see how satisfied you are, how more satisfied you are during the day. Remember what I said about the Rolling Stones and can't get no satisfaction? They were protein deficient, probably. But so it's about getting that satisfaction, eating the foods that your body actually is craving and hungering for, and spreading it out through the day. And they say, when you look at it, 30 grams on an average person, if it's 120 grams a meal, that's 360 grams, nearly 2/3 of a pound, probably haven't done the maths, of meat, chicken, or fish. So for a lot of people, that is actually quite a bit. But when you spread it out, rather than having it all at the end, because some people have 200, 300, 400 gram steaks. You can see them in the restaurant, 1 pound piece of steak. You don't want to have it all at the end of the day. Have it spread throughout the day. And so they say on average, just to give you an idea, going between 360 grams and 540 grams should cover most people's bases. So you'll be somewhere in there for your protein intake, your meat, chicken, and fish intake that you need during a particular day. And one thing I was going to say, if you're looking at weight loss or fat loss as a thing, is that sometimes you may not actually lose weight on the scales. Like if you are weighing yourself, I don't actually recommend you do. If you do weigh yourself, there's 2 options. One is you can just weigh yourself once a week, first thing in the morning, after you go to the loo, and without clothes on, obviously, just so you can, and then just measure it once a week, so you're not sort of stepping on the scales every day. If you can't avoid, if you just can't help yourself from stepping on the scales once a day, then average it out every 3 days. So you measure every day, and then you plot on a graph the average of the 3 days. So you take 3 days, the last 3 days, and you average out the weight divided by 3. You total it, average divide by 3, so you've got the average. Plot that, and then the next day you take the past 3 days. So every day you're changing your days you're doing the average of, but you get a much realer perspective of what's happening with weight if you're using weight as an idea. But if you are using weight as an idea, and if you're not losing, say, a pound or more a week, then there's some kind of issue going on. And the issue is generally that you want to lower the carbohydrates, and then if you've got your carbohydrates right down as far as you can go, like the under 10, then you can start looking at lowering protein. So once you've learned to add in protein, if you still have weight as an issue, then, and if you're eating 3 meals a day, then cut one of those meals down a third in protein. Just one meal, take a third of the protein out, and then at the end of the week, see how you're going with that. Does that hopefully that makes sense, that you're looking at carbohydrates first for weight loss, then you're looking at proteins, you're looking at increasing the proteins for satisfaction, and then if you've got your carbohydrates down and you've got your protein up and you're still having an issue with losing weight and your body isn't just recomposing. There was a bad joke I read on Michael Ead's blog just this week. He said, what is Mozart, the famous composer, doing now? And the joke is that he's decomposing. I know that's a really bad joke, but the point he was trying to make was that when we change our diet, when we change what we eat, we actually recompose our body. So what that means is that your weight might stay the same, but your body gets slimmer, it gets less fat on it, and the muscle mass gets more. And it's not that you get big, bulky muscles. It's not about becoming a bodybuilder, because the fat that gets replaced is the fat inside the muscle. So the muscle might even, shrink a little bit in terms of bulk, because fat is bulkier. But if you have less fat, making the muscle bulky, then you have real lean muscle mass. So that's how you recompose your body, is changing your diet. And so sometimes you actually you feel like, well, I'm not losing. If you're addicted to the scales, which I really recommend you let go of that addiction, throw it out if you need to, and just focus on what's going on with your clothes and your belly. Your waistline is a real important measurement, and the other one is your lean body mass. So figure out how to work with your lean body mass, and you want to see that increasing as you go. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. I'm just looking at my notes here to see I haven't missed anything. No, that's all good. So I'm going to look through see if anyone's left any questions. And so if I see some questions, I'll answer those. Hopefully I'll get all of them if I can see them. I can see people watching. And don't see any questions. A lot of good comments, which is great. Appreciate those. So if there's no other questions at the moment, I'll give you a minute just to see if you can think of any. You type them in, and then I'll see it coming up, and then I'll answer those. If not, I'll move on, and thank you for watching. Hopefully this has been helpful. And next week I'm going to be doing what I call the third major challenge, or the third biggest thing to focus on when you're looking at low carb, high fat, and I look forward to sharing that for you. And in the meantime, have a great time with applying the ideas from last week about carbohydrates and this week about protein to your daily lifestyle, because it's not really about, one last thing I'd like to say, it's not about, particularly if you're trying to lose weight, it's not about doing something to lose weight or get healthier or whatever and then go back to normal. It's about actually creating a new normal, and so you want to eat. Eating to lose weight needs to be the same way you're going to eat beyond that. Eating to get healthy is the same way you eat to stay healthy. So it's not about thinking that you're going to eat a particular way and then you're going to go back to the old ways, because the simple fact is, where did that old way of eating get you? It's not actually quote unquote normal, it's quote unquote abnormal. And so it's about learning to what is a good normal for you. And we all have slight variations, slight difference in terms of carbohydrates we can eat, what we can basically tolerate, and we have different levels of protein needs, like I've talked about. But it's about getting those right for you, and then you don't have to think about it anymore, and then you can just love your body, love what's going on, and love sharing it and help people wake up to what they need to do, which is one of the things I love doing. And thanks so much for listening. I don't see any questions coming through, so I'm going to wind up now, and enjoy the rest of your weekend and your days. Bye for now.